Welcome, everyone. Happy Lumio Palooza week. I am Tisha Poncio. I'm lead of education and community at Smart Technologies, and Lumio is one of the fabulous tools that we have at Smart. We're going to introduce you to all sorts of things this week. So if you haven't registered, I'll pop some links in the chat in a bit. I want you to go register, find the session that speaks to you. We have 4 different learning tracks this year, so you get to choose which sessions you want. You can mix and match. You will get the recordings to all of those sessions, and as always, you will get a certificate when you fill out the survey. You'll also get a certificate for this session. This is our very first keynote, so we are going to kick things off, but I just want to give all of you a couple of reminders. So at any point during this keynote or any Lumio Palooza session, take screenshots, take selfies, show us what you're eating for lunch while you're watching sessions. If you're by the beach and you're watching a session, make sure you're doing a screenshot or a reel. Let us know how you are enjoying your summer. I see a ton of you in the chat. You're joining in from all over the world, Texas and Poland and Fort Worth and Canada. I see all of you out there. Use the hashtag #GoLumio and also use the hashtag LumioPalooza 2025. Tag all of the content that you are curating, the great things that you're seeing and learning, things that are making you happy about Lumio Palooza, and we are going to share out all of your content. I am really just excited to bring up my first keynote of the week. So I'm going to bring them on stage. But before I do so, I'm going to read a little bit about them to you. Now, the fun thing I did here, because if you know me, you know I like to have fun with ChatGPT. So I really did go into ChatGPT and said, tell me about these 2 people. And I wanted to see how accurate it was. And it was pretty accurate with what it told me, with the exception of where our keynoters are teaching. So I am thrilled to introduce today's keynote, Joe and Kristin Merrill. They are the dynamic duo behind the interactive class series. So if you don't know about that, you want to Google search that right now. They have a combined of over 20 years of classroom experience. They are currently in the classroom teaching right now, and they have transformed elementary education in ways that they just kind of came out of nowhere in my life and then just taught me all kinds of things. So get your notepad ready, get all of your little notes, sticky notes, whatever you got going, because they're going to show you some things. Kristin teaches middle school ELA, and Joe teaches a 3rd grade reading, writing, and social studies. But that isn't the only thing that they've done. They'll be able to speak to some of that as they're speaking to you. And so I'm going to bring them up on stage. But what I want to tell you is that they are the fantastic duo that really speaks to creativity in a way that so many people don't. Welcome, Joe and Kristin Merrill. How are you?
Tisha, I don't think we've ever gotten an introduction.
That was so
that.
kind.
Amazing.
That was so kind.
Well, the thing is, you aren't just authors and presenters, and that's really what we want everybody to know. You are literally hands-on educators in the classroom. You're doing all of the duties. You're also learning yourselves and then showcasing strategies that are working for you in whatever role you're in. I think that's the thing. You have so many fans out there, and I bet you're going to have a lot of new fans after this session. What are you guys going to share with us today? What is the title of your session?
Well, we're super excited because it speaks to something that's very relevant, at least in our opinion, to today's learners. We're talking about creativity.
And how creativity is more than just a buzzword.
Yeah.
And what do we mean by that? When you guys say that, I know what that means, right? But tell me a little bit more about the title. How did you come up with that? And what are some mindsets out there around creativity?
Well, honestly, creativity right now feels like one of those words, like when you're teaching rigor or things that your districts like to talk a lot about, that you already know what it means and you feel like they're kind of pushing it in a certain light. And so for us, it's something that we've been hearing a lot with all of the AI and everything that's been out there. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized this isn't a buzzword. This isn't something new. This is something that's been around for so long. Why are we so worried about that? And why do we have this mindset? That's wrong. But why are we trying to dig this word back out from a place that it's always been?
That's so interesting. I heard something this week about going back to basics. And I know in the age of AI, there's so much buzz around that, which is awesome. But I think sometimes we forget, the creativity. One of the things that I say is creativity is the assessment. And I think it goes right along with your idea. It's more than just a buzzword. We can't just say that we're doing creativity and then like checking a box. It's so much bigger than that. So do you see anybody in the chat? I know we have a ton of people. I just want to shout them out. Monica, who is one of our Lumio ambassadors, and Sarah. I saw Milena in the chat. Katrine is here. I see some familiar faces. Devin, there's so many people here, and I know you're going to have so many new fans. Again, if you guys are watching as they're presenting, you can take screenshots. You can do selfies with Kristin and Joe as they're presenting if you want. Post them on social. Make sure you tag all of us. And I believe they can find you everywhere at the Merrills EDU, correct?
2 R's and 2 L's because
there's 2 of us.
She hates it when I do that.
That's awesome. Okay, well, without further ado, I'm going to go backstage. I'm going to let you guys get started on your presentation, and I'll be watching the chat for you.
Thanks so much, Tisha. We'll see you. Well, thank you, everybody. As Tisha mentioned, my name is Joe.
And I'm Kristin.
And we're super excited to be with you guys today. We've really kind of dive. I don't want to say delve is like an AI term. We dove into this topic of creativity recently quite heavily because we do find it to be very, very necessary with today's learners.
Yeah, I feel like when technologies first jumped into the classroom, we felt the need to talk about how we can have an interactive classroom and really build learning with technology. And then I think now as that's kind of settled and AI has come in, now we're kind of looking at how do we keep our classrooms in the way that we always have done with all of this new things. And I think it's really important to kind of look at, we'll talk a little bit further, but this idea that creativity and tech and AI, it's not a or situation. It's not like you have to be creative or use AI. It's really more of an and situation, right? We can do both. We can be creative and we can use AI or, technology. And so it's kind of what we've been looking at this summer.
And it kind of got us thinking, so what does creativity look like? Because I feel like that's a loaded question. And it probably wasn't at one point in time. I think at one point in time, it was a pretty crystal clear answer. But now things have kind of changed a bit.
It's a very, very subjective, right? Yeah. And so it's also very ambiguous. It's not very concrete, which we know in education, anytime something is not concrete and ambiguous, it becomes hard to understand. So I like to keep it really simple and think that creativity is something different, something like that, just something different than it was before. But let's talk about it. Let's consider creativity.
Yeah. So if you look at this picture right here, would you consider this to be creative? This is a picture that was created by a toddler. And I think when you first look at this picture, you could all probably agree we have no idea what is happening here, right? But the genius thing about creation is that this toddler can tell you literally everything that's going on in that picture. Mm-hmm. And what's amazing about this picture is once you start to hear the student reflect, once he starts to explain, and then we can start to see those details that come out. At first glance, there was no details. Now there's lots of details.
Yeah. So at first glance, you might struggle to understand what's happening, but really creativity is so much more than the box that we or as a society has pigeonholed it as like art or crafts or painting, right? Yes, it is a drawing. It can be creative, but really the student's explanation of that work is almost more powerful, if not more, than the actual drawing they did themselves, right? The curiosity that goes into it, the type of thinking that led them to draw that, the emotions behind it, right? So would you consider this creative? Maybe not at first hand, right? Like maybe we wouldn't. We would just look at it as a drawing.
Right, because it's a stick figure, right? There's just stick designs.
And so, but when you look into it, there is a lot of other things that come behind the scene. And so that's kind of like what we wanted to talk about today is this idea that creativity hasn't changed, but how we recognize it and how we nurture it must change. Because in a world of AI and digital videos and all of the things that our kids, the way they learn or the way they see the world is very different. And so when you compare something like that drawing to the world we live in today, it looks different, right? And so this idea that we have to be on the hunt for it per se is a reality in our world, and nurturing it because it's pretty intimidating. I'm techie. I'm not super techie. I don't know how to code websites and I don't know how to do a lot of the things that are pretty much at our fingertips nowadays. And so it can be overwhelming. It can be intimidating. And so with our students, it probably feels the same way, that drawing that I drew that I felt really proud of, maybe that's not good enough. Maybe that's not what was expected of me. And how, as teachers, we recognize the talents that our kids have, and then how we nurture them.
Right. And I think that, as someone who is not a great drawer, I can definitely relate to that. There's an element of risk that goes along with that. And so when you look at the risks, you've got to be able to try to redefine how that looks.
So that's basically what you don't want to do.
Well, sorry, yes, you don't want to redefine the risk.
You don't want to find no, yeah. Like creativity is not a concept that needs to be kept up with, right? Like it's not like something you're changing. It's not something like, oh, AI comes now and creativity is changing. Now I don't even know what the next technology is going to be. Oh, it's changing. No, creativity is not a new concept, right? It's timeless. It's always been relevant. And I think that's where we're running into problems right now, is because we're trying to make it something it's not. We're trying to change it.
Yeah, I think what I was getting at was that sometimes being creative works out, sometimes it doesn't.
Oh,
but either way, it's a learning process. And that's really what our students should be focusing on, is the learning process. And so having these creative elements that are in there, it just helps them throughout their journey. So
yeah, no two types of creativity look the same.
Right.
And there's always an element of expression in anything that a child does, but it's timeless, right? And so some things in creativity don't change, right? I saw someone in the comments mention that, like, it's like critical thinking. There's a risk taking, which is what you were just talking about, a type of expression. And so all of these things, if you think about a classroom, I mean, we're not going to be that nice and give you how old we are, but we've been in the classroom for a long time. And all of these things have always been prevalent in my classroom.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's funny because, I feel like now with the new age of AI in there, some people think that AI will just do a lot of that stuff for them, but that's not actually true. AI is not going to erase creativity. What it can do is it can help others maybe with becoming creative, but you still got to get creative with the AI.
Yeah, so you can use these cool powers, these superpowers of AI to create something new, but you still have to do the thinking for it, right? You still have to maybe think of the new idea and take that risk. And so AI is not erasing creativity. AI is just going to level the playing field for some of those students who might feel discouraged, who maybe are not good at a certain like coding or a certain thing, but the danger that we have, I think, with creativity is that we're overthinking it.
Yeah, sometimes I think that our students in particular, when they're working on a project that's involving creation, especially we notice this with some of our higher achieving students, they tend to overthink things way too much. And that's a really big distraction for some of the academics that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, so I fall into this pit. So I can be honest in this sense that sometimes I think that I have to always come up with something new. Right? To be relevant, to be relatable to people, I have to come up with a new thing, the new idea, the new program. And there's fun to that. Like it makes my job enjoyable, but it doesn't always have to. And so oftentimes we go back and look at presentations from 5 or 6 years ago of things, and we're like, that's a great lesson. They're great skills that kids are doing in there. There's so much creativity and choice in that project. Why would I change it? Why would I? Maybe I use a different tool, or maybe I give them a little more choice, or I can update it. But the danger of this digital age is that we keep thinking we have to reinvent things, and we keep thinking that everything has to be new, and we can repurpose some of these ideas and just be creative in how we do it.
Right. I mean, like if you think about back in the day, 2000, right?
Oh.
How we used to be creative there was things like trifold boards. And there was so much creativity that went inside of these projects.
I hated them though.
They were such treacherous amounts of work for us as a student, right?
Well, there's soft skills in there.
There's definitely soft skills. There's cutting, there's pasting, there's typing.
There's design,
right?
Like titles. So like, even though it's not my favorite mode of presentation, there's nothing wrong with it, okay? And do my own kids still make sign for boards like this? Yeah, they do. Do they still struggle with it? Yes, they do. But there's also really cool new technologies and new ways that you can present information that might speak to, I know they speak to my kids. I mean, my son did that project. And so it's finding that balance of what can I do with what I have and what I've done? How can I reinvent it? But I don't necessarily have to do everything new to be creative, right?
Right. Yeah.
Go back to an oldie. Oldie but a goodie.
Right. It just gives another outlet for today's learner to be able to express themselves and to think at a different level. And, really what that does is it kind of builds upon the idea of creativity is just intelligence having fun. And this is a quote from Albert Einstein that we like to share because it really does speak volumes to us. I mean, that's what it is, right? We're getting our kids to have fun with their learning and to be original, but at the same time, like we mentioned, sometimes they're just remixing ideas, right?
I mean, I think ultimately you had it right. Like, are you having fun? Am I having fun in my job? Are my students having fun? Do I have a plan in place for them to tell me whether they're having fun? Because ultimately, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, I hate to break it to you, you're not going to keep doing it. And as a student, if you're not enjoying what you're doing, you're not going to learn. The brain study shows that if you have a wall or you have a negative thought put up against something, your ability to retain that information is far less than if you are enjoying the process. And so how do we do this in this digital age, right? How do we be creative? Well,
you have to recognize it.
That's the first step.
If you think back to that drawing that we shared early on from the toddler, what we didn't tell you is that was actually a stairwell. All those little lines were stairs. And so just because we didn't see it at first, when we had that student talking about it and reflecting, we could then identify that there actually was a whole lot of creativity that went into that, even though it was stick figures. And so the problem isn't always that we're the problem isn't that the students aren't creative. It's just that we don't always recognize it for what it is.
And we need to be able, like we said, have those lenses, look for those types of things, give that student the empowerment of explaining their learning and explaining their process, bring value to what all students do, right? Because not every student is going to be techie. Not every student's going to be artistic. Not every student's going to write, and that's okay. But how do we find our students where they're at and then build those skills within them differently? Right. And so in the modern classroom, creativity can look like so many different things. It might be, you can demonstrate your learning in so many different ways. And it's not always loud and flashy. I don't use technology in my classroom every single day. Right. It can be quiet. Like sometimes it can be something very simple. And the soft skills that you're developing within your students are very understated.
Well, think about coding, for example, right? That looks dirty on the inside until you actually see the polished product once you're running the code, and then you see the flashiness of it, right? And so even though there's a lot of like legwork that goes into it, the creativity doesn't always have to look, like you said, flashy and like over the top. And so there's lots of different skills that go into these types of projects that are creative elements that we have to recognize as educators.
And what's happening here too in this process, whether you're taking something that someone started and you're just remixing it or changing it, it's a great place to start for students who might be nervous about what their work looks like compared to others. Whether you're reimagining and doing something a totally different way in the coding, is that as students are working, they're building an understanding, right? They're building an understanding of how this game works and what I did wrong and what I did right. We learn, like that silly cliche phrase of we learn from our mistakes. Like it's true, right? We're building our learning as we're exploring and as we're doing. And that's what creativity is all about. Because then when you learn, it fosters a new idea. It fosters a new way of thinking that kind of like snowballs. Yeah, exactly. And so there are so many different ways that we can be creative in a classroom. And I saw someone comment about like, oh, I need ideas. We're going to give you a few here, a few places of things to check out. But obviously Lumio, right? So there's all these different ways that students can be creative, but really we need to put on new lenses. Okay. We need to put on new lenses and realize that like I might be a visual artistic person. And I can identify that anywhere I am. I can see beautiful architecture, but I have to also put on a lens and realize that like my child is not, but he might be this form of creative. And so putting on these lenses to figuring out where our students are, what their strengths are, and then what apps, what programs, what projects can I give them to meet all of those strengths.
Yeah, and I do want to shout this out really quick because I know this is a brand new feature, but now with the integration and the embed for Book Creator into Lumio, there's just like creativity layered on top of creativity, right? And so not just necessarily with how you're creating the actual content, but what you're doing with it then can become creative, right? Because as the educator, you could then have a whole class looking at a book project from Book Creator, and you could be sharing it. Maybe you want to bring in some of those Canva designs and you want to drop those into Lumio. That can also be a very creative way to get students engaged in learning. So should we show them some examples?
Yeah, so creativity then and now. And like we said, there's nothing wrong with the then, right? There were so many great things to do with creating a diorama. We also created them because we didn't have access to anything else. Like the world that our kids live in now is so different, and these things weren't even around, right? But some kids might think it's really cool to put yourself in the diorama. You can still create it, but why not level it up? Why not teach a little bit of video editing skills? You've got some speech and presentation. I just love the idea of taking it and just adding that one extra step.
Right, because they're still making the actual diorama. There's still that amount of creativity that goes into that, but adding that digitalized step of being able to go into it and then make it relevant in their terms is so much more of a level up.
I mean, you could build the diorama all on the computer too. You could build it in Minecraft and put yourself. I mean, there's so many different ways that you could do it depending on what your students' interests are. I had one 2 years ago, an 8th grader who drew something. She was so artistic and she was such a great artist. And then she put herself in it, right? So the possibility is what they're putting themselves in really just, again, depends on what type of creativity they have.
Yeah, and so it doesn't have to just be a diorama. Let's think back to like essays, right? Man, students today trying to write essays.
And we do. We trudge through it.
We do.
It's necessary.
It's tough, right? But I think if you, I don't want to say like tease them with a level up, but they can realize that, you know what, this content that I'm producing, this artifact of learning that I'm making and writing, this is not the end. Right? This is just to get me to the next step. And so something like a podcast to then go and to talk about what you wrote about would be a great way to have kids get creative with their writing.
Same skills, right? But you can only write so many essays, right? You can only explain something. And so a lot of our kids nowadays, they like to listen to podcasts. Well, let's talk about it. Can we tell a story in a podcast? Of course we can. You listen to true crime all the time. Can we learn something in a podcast? Can it be more like a speech? Yep. You've got TED Talk. Like there's so many different ways to take the same information and teach our students how the process of our thinking and the process that we push out things depends on our audience and our form. And on top of this, there are some people who love to talk but don't want to be in front of a camera. This is a great option for those types of students to practice some of those. These are those skills that as an English language arts teacher, I always had a hard time figuring out how to do, right? Like the speaking, the presenting. And then on top of that, you're teaching them how to edit, right? There's like digital editing that goes on with some of these programs. And so again, both are fine, but a way to incorporate what we know into something a little bit new.
Right. So same thing. Remember those cereal box projects that everybody used to do?
This was amazing, Jackie Snackies.
Yeah. So, we used to have to bring in cereal boxes, which you never had enough of. There's always a few that are short. And then you had to decorate the whole box. And then, it was a lot of copying, cutting, pasting. And so that was a learning experience in and of itself. But you can also do bento boxes. Yeah. And bento boxes basically level up.
What kids don't like food? Bento. I mean, like kids love making bentos. They love making food. And digitally, or I think with my kids this year, I might even do them like in like with Realia. But I can judge a book. I can do a book report, right? We can do the box. Or I can say pick some items that you thought were the most important to describe the character and the character's life and the plot and whatever the things are that you are trying to teach, and look at the items they put in. And if you can't figure out what the item is to the story, it's an instant assessment, right? So what we don't understand too is like, I think we get fearful of creative projects because they're so ambiguous. Like there's so many ways you could go with it, but they're so great when you go to assess because that's the beauty of it. There's so many ways to go, but yet there's only one. I can tell whether you understand it or not so much quicker, which is kind of hard to wrap your mind around. So to me, the reality of all of these fun projects is step 2. You got to recognize it and you have to give it room to grow. Okay. Creativity needs space to breathe. And it's not just like a slot in your schedule. Okay. I know some teachers aren't going to like to hear this, but it takes time. You have to model it. You have to do it yourself, right? So when I sit there and I have my kids free write and I give them this fun challenge, you know what I do? I do it with them, right? I might not be good at it, but we model, we give space so that these ideas can actually take root.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to understand that like this is not going to be something that probably just takes one day, right? These lesson ideas. These are probably like the cereal boxes and the podcasting. These are spanned out over a period of maybe like a week or so, and you have to have that time to give your students the ability to foster that creativity, to bring it up, and to be able to show their demonstration of learning. Mm-hmm. So how do we go about doing that? Because we're all on time constraints, right? Yeah. So we've got to rethink our classroom structures. So one of the ways that we can do that is we can provide more choice for for our students.
Mhm.
By providing more choice for our students, they're going to be more likely to be engaged with what they're interested in.
And let's all be real. Like, I used to be a very rigid teacher. It was easy for me to be rigid because I had my times and I had my lessons and everything fit in the box and everything was organized and I had my little piles for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and it just fit well, right? It was easy for me. There's a lot happening. Sometimes it feels like you're just being pushed along because of all of the things you need. And that's a hard feeling to break out of. But once you break out of it and you start with a project like this, or you start looking for creativity, you'll actually realize you can get a lot more done with projects like this than I could in those little segmented activities. And then rethinking how often you ask your kids. I've had the benefit of having both of our sons in my class at different age levels.
The benefit,
because they're brutally honest, right? So there would be days last year, my son was in my 6th grade class, and we come home, I'd be like, oh my gosh, that was so fun. He'd be like, it was awful, Mom. It was so boring. I didn't like it at all. Not that I'm like taking his advice and like having to run with it, but he would tell me the truth, right? Why don't I do that with all my students? Why don't I ask them at the end of a project, like, did you like that platform? How long could you have used more time? What was hard for you? Right? Like that interactive relationship and bringing validity to the way they learn and the things that they need to feel successful really can help make those projects take actually less time and be more beneficial.
So how does creativity thrive? Well, you pretty much have to follow these 3 things we've kind of discovered.
Yeah.
So we've noticed that failure is going to happen and we have to roll with it, right? There's a huge learning experience in failure and our students get really good at that. We also know that we have to be flexible. We've got to have that time for space, but also the student voice aspect. We want to hear from our students. Like you said, what did you enjoy about that? Let's do that again, maybe next week, but let's try it a little bit differently. And so having that option to be able to breathe, so to speak, gives us the ability to kind of fluctuate where we go with our instruction.
And I think not only do students have to have all of these things, like we have to.
Yes.
There have been times that I have done a project and I've gone home that night, we've just started it, and I can already see that the train's off the tracks, it's a failure. And I've walked in and been like, never mind, change my mind. We're doing this instead. And I just kind of own that persona with my students, right? That I am like wild and crazy and like I changed my mind. When in reality, it's because it's going to be an absolute failure and I need to remodel and change how it looks in my brain. But letting them see that gives them so much more, ability to be like, oh, Mom, this idea was terrible. I'm going to change it. And you'd be like, okay, as long as you want to own that and take the time, like go for it. And so I think just not only modeling what creativity looks like, but modeling the failure, modeling being flexible, modeling just like understanding that sometimes things don't always go the way we want them to.
Yeah, so we've been kind of hammering home this point here, but how do we go about doing that? Well, you got to make space for creativity. There's got to be a time, well, not a time, there's got to be time throughout the lesson where your students have that ability to add in that creative element. That's not to say that some of those other foundational skills aren't important. Those are still there, but having that extra time and extra space to breathe really does help our students in taking it to the next level. And the next slide here, so this is like Kristin's dream come true here.
Okay,
so,
yes. So plants, you could put plants as an analogy for like so many things. And in our new book, I actually have a section in one of our chapters that uses the plant analogy. But when we were talking about giving space, the thing that kept coming to my mind was this idea of like when you grow a plant and it's in a pot and it outgrows its pot, like what happens to that plant? Well, I don't have any plants that have outgrown their pots because I'm super, I'm obsessed. And so I don't have any plants that are outgrowing their pot. But if you leave it in that small pot, it's just going to maybe stay the same, or it's eventually going to die because it's not going to have all of the things it needs to grow. But when you have plants, and all of these plants are plants that I've had since they were like this big, and you nurture them and you give them space to grow and you are responsive to them and you understand, like, just like a student, like what they need, they can grow and flourish. And these are some of my most favorite giant plants. Like they're taller than me, some of these plants, right? And so it's just such a neat image in my head of how we can make space in our classroom for our kids to grow. But there's effort, like there's things you have to do. You have to have that responsive relationship in order for that creativity to thrive. And just like a plant, like none of these plants grew overnight. None of them grew like the next day, right? Every day I walk out, you can tell you, I'll walk out with my coffee and I like look at them and I talk to them and there's no change, right? And so the same thing might happen in our classrooms. Like we want to be creative and we're going to do it. And it may not feel like that creativity is growing with our students. It may not feel like there's any progress being made, but if you can just sit through it and you can sit and look every day for something new, it's really cool at the end of the year to look at your students and be like, wow,
Yeah.
like that really is neat what we did from here to here. And there is change, even though it might appear really small.
So it's important to remember, though, that when you're going throughout this whole process, is that when it comes to creativity, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just need to notice it differently. And so if we think about the first wheel, right, and how that looks, I think a lot of times now, if you ask kids about a wheel, they're going to talk about the processing wheel of a computer, and when things start to spin, right? Or the hanging screen, I guess.
I think our son would say the hamster wheel, but
the hamster wheel, maybe, yeah.
Running on the hamster wheel, but you just need to look at it differently.
It's funny because even like the kids will look at it differently, right? And so being able to look at it differently is the key to where you can get this all integrated into your classroom.
And so our challenge for you today is to think about your own learning environment, whether you have your own classroom of kids, whether you push in, whether you are an administrator of an entire school, but where in your classroom or your learning environment can you give creativity room to grow? Right? Is there maybe one subject area where you can give a little bit of extra time? Maybe there's one app that you could learn that you could use in a lot of different ways. If you're here, I assume you know of Lumio. Maybe just how could I use Lumio different, right? Like maybe just like thinking outside the box or thinking of one different way that you could infuse creativity into your classroom.
Yeah. And so we want to leave you with this. Creativity isn't a buzzword, it's a birthright. And so sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Sorry. So if it's something that we uncover, you have to have room for it to grow. And just like your plant suggestion there, you don't want to keep it confined within that pot. You want to make sure that can bloom and grow however big it needs to or wants to. And so we just want to say thank you guys for hanging out with us for a half an hour and all the comments. We haven't had a chance to read them all, so we're going to go back and try to answer some questions if they do come up. But thank you guys so much. We so appreciate it. Really quick, before I forget, I'm super excited about the next keynote that's coming up tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. So before we answer any questions or go into it, we just want to make sure we mention it.
Make sure that you check out tomorrow's keynote with Selena. That's going to be tomorrow at noon Eastern time, which, you can do the time adjustment for that. But I'm super excited to check that out myself.
We're so excited. You guys, that was fantastic. The truth is nobody had a question, but a lot of people had a ton of comments, tons and tons of comments. I was putting them on the screen as they were popping up. They love your energy. What I have a surprise for everybody who's still here. So it's a good thing that 55 people are still here. Joe and I were having a chat backstage, a private chat, and I decided that we were going to give away a copy of each of our books. So you're going to get a copy of Joe and Kristin's book. Put it close to the camera, Kristin, so everybody can see it. You're going to get a copy of that. You're also going to get a copy of my book, Today's Learners, Tomorrow's Leaders. And I have the winner right now, because what I did is as you were commenting, I asked, put all of your comments in, said, ChatGPT, tell me who the winner is. And Sarah, you are the winner. You're the winner. You were the most engaged in the chat. We are going to reach out to you, or you reach out to me, actually. Email me, Sarah. Send me a text message. I'm going to get your mailing address. Joe and Kristin will send you a copy of their book. I'm going to send you a copy of my book. We want all of you to remember that a lot of things that Kristin and Joe said, I'm going to actually shout out what I heard from you. Okay. So these are my notes, just so y'all know. I do take notes as keynotes are happening. So I loved what you said. You said build learning like it has a snowball effect. And in my mind, because Kristin and I both have ADHD, I was like, ooh, build learning like you're building a snowman, right? Like it's a little by little by little, and then it gets bigger and bigger. I love that you said that there was danger in thinking that you can't reinvent or repurpose an existing lesson. I think that's so important as teachers are going back to school. The other thing I love that you said, AI is not erasing creativity. And I think that's so important. That's such an important message for us to really just focus on. And then you said something about overthinking. And I love that you said that overthinking was sort of like a barrier. So many neurodivergent people like Kristin and I, we really just... we're overthinking everything. And then we're also thinking about other things that we shouldn't be overthinking. And it's a whole process. Here's my question for you. So if I were going to, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot today. If you're in your classrooms, you have your rooms already, you're in front of your kids, and you want to do a really easy, creative, get to know you activity with the new students that you have coming in this year, What does that look like? Give me 3 tools that you would be utilizing in your classroom.
I can tell you what I'm going to do with my students this year.
Okay, tell us.
I don't know the tool. We're going to do, because I'm a reading teacher, so we're going to do, if your summer were a book, like a novel or a book, I should say novel, what would it be? And they're going to have to look at we're going to review the different genres of books, and then the type of tone and mood that would go into it. And then they're going to have to design it, pick one thing out of their summer and write to that kind of format. So I haven't decided. I'll probably give them the choice to do it on paper or on the computer. Yes. That's one. One year I took an old dictionary and I ripped out pages, and I had the students kind of like black out poetry style, find words or phrases from the pages and decorate them. And then I cut them into like a pennant, and I made a decoration for my classroom. That was really fun. Get to know you. That's
amazing.
So before I taught third grade, I taught first grade for a long time. And one of my favorite beginning of the year activities was to, and you could do this with a variety of tools, was to have the kids go on to the platform, whichever one you want to use, and have them create a self-portrait using the draw tools, for example. And so it's kind of double dipping, because they get into the platform, that gets them using the actual tool itself. But then what I would do is I would save those images and upload them as their profile pictures for different platforms.
Wow.
And so some of them wish they took a little bit more time into creativity than others.
They can do it again.
But they can always go back and do it again. So that's always one of my favorite start of the year activities.
Those are incredible ideas. Now, I want to hit on a topic. This isn't how we're going to end, but I think about the teachers who are overwhelmed. They have a lot going on. They're, I'm obviously on teacher TikTok. I'm still watching that. I'm still a teacher at heart. I relate to all of that. Getting your room ready, or you're moving rooms and you have to move somebody's stuff out. And then you also have all the requirements at the beginning of the year. What are some ways that you and Kristin really keep the fire of creativity and innovation ignited in yourselves personally when you're in the midst of all the requirements that you have to have done as a teacher?
I think for me, it's just looking at the kids in front of your classroom, right? And so wanting to do better for them is what keeps all of us going in the profession, is that we know that our kids deserve the best. We want to give them the best. And so we get, no pun intended, creative with how that looks. Even when creativity might be lacking, we find a way for it to get into our lessons. And
he is like the saint of answers here, because mine's going to sound so selfish compared to yours. We just find it and we do it for the love of it. I'm like, no. What I do is I actually take time to do things that are enjoyable for me. Yes. So I make time, whether it's, like I said, I really do have a problem. I have plants everywhere, whether it's like going out on my porch to take care of plants or water plants.
Now it's gone into video games, because now
I was getting there. Sourdough. I learned how to make sourdough and love it. Like, I love making it, and I just make it for myself and make it for people. Like, you don't put any pressure or like constraints. We have this silly video game that sometimes I just sit in bed and brain rot and
Animal Crossing.
Play this silly game of
Animal Crossing. Yes.
Right. And as in the moment, sometimes those things do feel like.
Okay, you totally you glazed over that though.
They open your mind.
That's what I was going to think.
When you let everything come out, that's when the space comes in for the things to kind of come in. And I feel like we don't as often. The other thing I started doing, and this is going to sound really cheesy, but I told him the other day, I was like, I'm a list maker, because I have a hard time like following through with things, and my brain always has things going on, that sometimes I make lists of all the things I need to do. And the other day I was like, I stopped doing that. I want to let you know that instead of making the list of all the things I need to get done, I wrote a list today of all the things I did, right? All of the things that I did that I feel like when I look back on it aren't going to matter. And then when I wrote and looked at all the lists, I was like, you know what? That was a lot of stuff. Like, and it might seem silly in the moment when you're doing it, but like, look, I cleaned my whole house and I make food for my kids, and right. And it helps you remember that you are doing valuable things. And I did see that comment about gaming's way to engage our students. Yes. It is. And he actually did a whole lesson on Animal Crossing with his first graders, because that was like their game and their thing. And so I think it's also good, because when my kids come in next year, like, they know me as the crazy coffee plant lady, right? But like, I baked bread and brought it into my students. They would like make special requests, and like things like that is how you make those connections and how your students see you as a real person too. Right?
This is a great question. On that topic, how do you do gaming without devices? Like, what is the solution for that?
I mean, you could do silly games like the heads up. I do that game with my kids all the time where they wear the headband and you put the cards on your head and you're guessing the things. Cranium with the dice where you roll the dice and you draw it or you act it out, right? You can gamify anything. Like it can be like stand in a row and 4 corner. I mean, kids don't need a lot to make something gamified. It can be something like like there's so many different ways. I was thinking of like grammar too, like putting up a sentence in the beginning of the day and then like whoever figures it out first, the error. Like there's just ways to gamify. I just try to do things where either there's no right answer or maybe it doesn't pit them against each other. It maybe pit them against their best self. But I mean, any thoughts on gamifying without devices?
Well, going back to that Animal Crossing example, if you go to our website, if you go to our blog and you search Animal Crossing, you can find it. But that did have elements of using tech and devices in it, but there was also a good chunk of that did not. So the whole unit was based around maps. Yeah. And so, it wasn't necessarily using a device, but it was teaching them how to use the skills that they would have gotten from the game at home, Animal Crossing, and then bringing it into the classroom and how they can use that within the
I mean, like when Flora's Lava was a big TV show, we did a Flora's Lava like game in our classroom and like the kids threw
I remember that.
People, right? Amazing Race. I've done an Amazing Race thing at my school with clues and I had parents sitting around the school and they got like free access and like, I mean, like, you can pull in, but really it's like Noel said, like incorporating what's into them right now, right? Like what they're really interested in. Because I might love Animal Crossing, but like if they've never seen it, it's not going to hit the same way.
Right.
Somebody said that to me this week, like relate to your students. Like they may not have, they may not know like, Rocky and Bullwinkle. So you need to adjust what makes sense to them and then make it a game, which really, as you said, Kristin, I think it's a really great point. And I want everybody to leave here with this because this has come up multiple times in conversations I've had with educators, but you need to allow yourself room to think. And that's what Kristin's doing with her sourdough and with her games and with her plants. She's just allowing her brain some space to think. And then I love your strategy about writing down what you actually did, not what you have to do, because what you have to do is so full of pressure, especially as a teacher. And when you're managing, your classroom and your home, like writing down what you did, I think is a really, really great strategy. And I've never heard anyone do that. So thank you.
Well, and as teachers, I think it's easy to overlook that. We don't give ourselves enough credit for the amount of things that we're doing in a day. And so do that for yourself. Write down all the things that you did because you're going to feel a whole lot better. It makes you feel
a lot better. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, so maybe I didn't get all the things done, but I did get all of these things done. And then most of the time it encourages me to be like, okay, I'll take one more thing, right? I'll do 100%. Most productive day.
100%. Well, listen, everybody who's watching, I put the survey link in the chat. You can fill out that survey for this keynote session. We'd love to hear your feedback. I'm also going to post the Lumio Palooza link so that you can share it with all of your friends because you want to let everybody know we still have so many sessions today and tomorrow and a keynote from Selena. You want to be watching. Kristin and Joe, do you have any last words for everybody watching here today?
Thank you so much. It's the middle of the day. I'm sure you guys could be doing a million other things. So the fact that you were hanging out with us means the world to us. We so appreciate it.
Yeah. Stay creative. Have a good summer.
Stay creative. Yes. Thank you both for joining me. It has been a pleasure. Remember, all of you watching, we want to see all of the great things you're doing for Lumio Palooza. We want your comments, your tweets, your Instagram reels. We want you to tag us all over the place. I will also put Joe or I put it in the chat, I believe, but what is your website again, Joe and Kristin?
themerrillsedu.com.
Yes.
Two L's.
Because there's two of us, and we're on all other social platforms: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, depending on what your preferred place to be is.
Yeah, so
absolutely.
You'll get one of us. So.
Absolutely. Thank you again. We are going to end this stream. All of you have a great day, and we'll see you online.
Thank you, friends. Bye.